anytime you step outside of your comfort zone, it's not going to be smooth, but that's part of the adventure. That's what makes life memorable and even worth living, honestly. Most of the most terrifying decisions we can make in life, they require like 5 minutes of courage. That's pretty much it. So if that's a trip, it's like the 5 minutes to check Google Flights and put in your credit card info for the flight. If that's a road trip, it's the 5 minutes of actually getting in the truck and turning the key and pulling out of your driveway. And then once you're out of your driveway, once you're on the interstate, you're done. I mean, you've done the hard part. The hard part is getting through the commitment of doing something new. Genuinely, every time in my life, it has been 5 minutes. That's all I had to do was 5 minutes of being courageous or bold. And then after that, it's like, okay, now I'm in. Now I'm in.
What does maximizing every single day look like to you?
I think maximizing every single day means coming in with a little bit of structure. So for me, that means getting out of the house and doing one thing each day that is out of bounds, that is something I'm not, planning to do, whether that's getting up and going for the sunrise on the beach or going and watching the sunset from the front porch, or, whether it's even something in kind of my plan, which for me is reading my Bible each morning, just something that is separate from the demands and the desires of the world, which is like checking email and going to work and doing that sort of routine stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Leaning into those things that actually light us up and bring us joy in life. And you're honestly like the pro at this, right? With all of your amazing travels and really leaning into just exploring new parts of the world. And that's what we're really going to focus on today, maximizing every day and maximizing our life and really stepping outside of your comfort zone and exploring. So would love to dive into a little bit of these travels that you've gone on, Bryce. So what would be a message that you would send to someone who wants to adventure more, step into going on that solo trip and take that risk? What was your personal journey in really starting that?
My journey was nothing and then walking into everything. So I started out, I was working full time through high school. I was homeschooled, so I had that opportunity where I could work full time and save money. And I'd reached a really low point in my life. My dad had gotten terminal cancer when I was 17. Right about that same time, my brother took his own life. So I was really at a very low point and I had nothing to look forward to. And I remember sitting in my bedroom one day and my sister had come back from a little trip to Eastern Europe, just like 2 weeks over there. And she walked by my room and she was like, "Bryce, I think you need something to look forward to." And she didn't say it in a very kind way. She said it in like an older sister, like, get your stuff together, And so I booked a trip, and that was the motivation that I needed to go to outside my comfort zone. For me, that was going to the Alps for 2 weeks, spending every dollar I had on a little 2-week trip at 18 years old. But I think it really depends on the situation and who you are. There's always an opportunity, if you can't do a trip like that, to go out on a Friday night and go spend the night camping in a state park or in the woods in a national forest or something along those lines, to go for a walk in nature, every day or once a week somewhere pretty and beautiful, or go just take a trip somewhere outside of your comfort zone. And it's going to require effort, and it's not always going to go smooth. On that first trip, we got diverted around a thunderstorm in DC and ran out of fuel, so we had to get diverted again. I lost my luggage because of that, so I was in Geneva trying to get across Switzerland for 3 days with only the clothes I had and my toothbrush and my contact case. And that took 3 days to get to me. And then I didn't have a SIM card because I didn't know how to travel abroad. So I just had an old iPhone with no internet, and I was trying to get through Geneva and Lausanne, which is, they speak 3 languages in Switzerland and none of them are English. And so you just have to go in knowing that anytime you step outside of your comfort zone, it's not going to be smooth, but that's part of the adventure. That's what makes life memorable and even worth living, honestly.
What did this experience of stepping outside your comfort zone and travel, what did that teach you the most, and how did that start to heal you from that really difficult time that you were navigating?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to sitting in silence, which is something that we don't have an opportunity to do passively in this modern world. You really have to go out of your way and be intentional about finding quiet space to reflect and come to know who you are. And so for me, that would be the biggest thing that came out of those travels, was just the desire to sit in creation, in silence, sit somewhere by myself and just understand and just wrestle with the thoughts that were inside my head. And that wasn't pretty. It was rarely pretty. It was rarely fun, but it's something that I had to do, because kind of the principal takeaway was always, there's one person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with, and for better or for worse, it's me. So I better get comfortable understanding who I am and working with my mind and my thoughts. And to do that, just sitting in solitude so often. And other things come out of that. You know, you have these beautiful experiences and these reflections. And for me, I'm Christian, I'm religious. It brought me evidence sitting in nature. If you're in a riverbed and you're sitting on a rock and a dragonfly comes and flies around your head and then sits on your knee and you're just staring at the fractals and the wings, you can't really go, oh, I'm in this universe alone. I'm out here by myself. You know, it's almost impossible. Everything points back to something greater, something bigger at work.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I love that you brought that up, because it might not be something that we necessarily associate with travel, but I think it's a really important part of it, especially solo travel, is leaning into that discomfort of spending time alone and getting to love being on our own. And I'm glad that you shared about that first experience going on that trip, how it didn't go according to plan. And there were a lot of challenges and obstacles that you had to push through. But it sounds like on that journey that you learned a lot and you gained a lot of confidence and became a lot more resilient through figuring all that out and learning along the way. Like, I think it's stepping into that fear that allows you to get more comfortable in continuing to keep that motivation to step outside of your comfort zone.
Well, 100%. And I know from my own experiences traveling, it's been anytime there's kind of a line that you cross on anything. So, for instance, on that first trip, there was like my whole life up until that point, which was my life. I knew it and I experienced it. And that was kind of the box that I was in. And then crossing out and really pushing the boundaries of that box by going on that trip alone expanded my world, expanded even with those experiences, such as with the flight or with the luggage or with no SIM card, expanded my ability to comprehend what was going on in the world and also to become comfortable when facing adversity, which is what at that time, that was kind of the principal goal of my life, even though I didn't know it, going through 1, 2, 3 things back to back that were really breaking me down to the core. It was like, in the future, how do I face adversity? And that was the lesson that I was learning through my travels and through my experiences by primarily being alone, such as, you know, flying into an airport and not understanding anything, or being on a road trip by myself and backing into a tree in Arkansas and shoving a tree through my back window in my truck and breaking that. Like, just facing adversity almost in these lesser ways of traveling, which translates to being able to just live every day and understanding how to prosper in a world where you're going to have trials and tribulations and things that don't always go right.
Yeah, it's that beautiful idea that sometimes it is the experiences that feel uncomfortable and difficult that actually make life so much better, because what it does is it allows us to strengthen that muscle of being able to roll with whatever life brings, because we can't plan and control every single aspect of life. And travel is something that opens our perspective and strengthens us in a way that we can carry into our everyday lives. And I love that you brought up this idea that you don't have to have it all planned and figured out. And this came up in that story when you shared about your first solo trip, that things went wrong and you didn't really know what you were doing and you had to figure it out as you went, right? So share a little bit about this idea that we don't need to have the perfect plan before going for the thing or booking the trip in your case.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's kind of a general outline, which is like you have to have a general idea, a general concept of where you want to be or where you want to go. So on the very minute scale of like taking a trip, I knew for my first road trip, I wanted to go out west. I wanted to go see Arizona and New Mexico and Wyoming. But I didn't know the specifics of where I was going to stay every night, what I was going to eat, the route I was going to take, the national parks or the forests I was going to see. So having that general goal at a larger scale in life is more, what is the purpose or the calling of my life at large? So if for my first road trip, the general theme is I want to go west. For my life, what is the general theme? Where do I want to go? Where do I want to be? And again, for me, that is something that I discovered almost exclusively by spending time in nature alone and really sitting down and being still and listening to God and what He had planned for my life, and also just working through all the noise in my head that accumulates from just living in the modern world. But that all comes back to just having this general outline. And from there, if you have a general goal, a general idea, for me, that is, I want people to go outside and experience creation and through that come to know their creator. Then everything from where I am today to where that goal is, that's all. I hate to be so generic about it, but it does really just figure itself out in so many ways. It requires work and it requires effort, and it's not going to be easy. Just like that first road trip where I backed into a tree, or I blew out a tire in Wyoming, or, running out of gas in a sandstorm in Arizona. It's not always pretty easy, but you will eventually make it. And as long as you have some goal to aspire to, some purpose, then anything in between where you are and where you're going, it's all manageable.
I think one of the hardest parts about embracing something like going on a trip alone and not necessarily having all the details planned can be really scary and intimidating for a lot of people. Like, I know personally, before I went on my first solo trip, I was like, I had this mindset, like I needed to like have everything planned and know exactly where I was like staying, right? And know what I was going to be doing. Like, well, I don't want to be bored and like have too much time alone and get like lonely and anxious and all these things. And it's easy to get in our heads and maybe try to overplan or talk ourselves out of it. So I'm really glad that you brought up the idea that you just have to trust and kind of embrace the not planning at all. But how would you suggest that someone kind of pushes through that fear of leaning into the uncertainty of it and taking that risk and maybe being open to like things going wrong and just figuring it out as you go?
Yeah, I think there's really two ways you go about it. If you are a planner and, for instance, with a trip, you're really down to the minute by minute level of this is what I want to do this day and this is how I'm going to do it. Travel and experiencing the world and going into new circumstances that you've never experienced before, it has a way of humbling you pretty immediately. So you cannot travel abroad for 2 weeks and everything go to plan. I mean, I can't even wake up in the morning and have a plan for my day and everything go to plan. So eventually, one way or another, you're going to run into these circumstances where you have to learn to be flexible, or you're just going to be stressed out and miserable the entire time, whether that's in your day or whether that's on a trip for 2 weeks, which is supposed to be fun. So I would say practically, if I'm going on a trip, it's really just having a general outline of, for instance, I was just in New Zealand for 3 months. So I wanted to go to New Zealand. I knew the national parks I wanted to go to, and I knew generally that there were certain cities or towns I wanted to go to. So from that, I can make a general outline. Okay, the South Island of New Zealand has a mountain range down the middle, and it's got a road that loops around, pretty much a 12-hour drive. I know not every single individual stop I'm going to make along the way, but I know I want to go down there and I want to go around the whole South Island. And that is honestly where some of the best experiences of my life have come from. For instance, there I found just driving down the road, not planned, little gravel pull-off. Oh, that's interesting. It looks like there's a little trail there, completely overgrown. And then next thing I know, I'm descending 3 ladders that are like 50-year-old rusted steel ladders on the coast, 2 ropes down to a waterfall on the beach that nobody even knows about. So planning is good to an extent, and I don't think anybody should go on a trip or live their life with no plan or intention. But one way or another, you will discover that you cannot plan every second, and it is probably wiser to go into an adventure and force yourself to be uncomfortable and face that discomfort in the planning stage of just knowing I have some empty space here. And ultimately it comes back to what is the fear there? Is it of wasting time or being alone? Really just thinking through that and going, is this even a real fear? Because oftentimes I've found it's not. It's entirely artificial, made up in my own mind.
Yeah, 100%. It's us getting in our heads 99% of the time and almost like clinging to this narrative that things are going to go wrong. Or I think it's just ultimately always just comes down to that fear of uncertainty, that the unknown can feel scary and uncomfortable. But again, I think the more that we step into the unknown and lean into that, we learn like, oh, that really wasn't nearly as bad as I thought. I think it's just like really a muscle that we build over time. Like the more we step into the unknown and the uncertainty, the better we get at navigating it and the less power that that fear holds over us. And beyond travel, I think that's such an important lesson and beautiful insight that you shared. That staying open to life and pivoting as things come up is really the best strategy, because we can only plan and control so much of life that, sure, like you said, having that general plan and having an idea of like generally the direction you want to go, but being able to pivot on a more granular level every single day as things come up. And then you share this other beautiful insight that sometimes the best experience are the unexpected and unplanned things. And if you release that tunnel vision and allow yourself to take a step back and stay open to those experiences as they come up, then you're going to get to experience those really awesome spontaneous ones, like you climbing down that random ladder.
Yeah, 100%. One of the principles that I always go back to, which I talk about so much with people and on social media and in the email newsletter I put out, is really most decisions, most of the most terrifying decisions we can make in life, they require like 5 minutes of courage. That's pretty much it. So if that's a trip, it's like the 5 minutes to check Google Flights and put in your credit card info for the flight. If that's a road trip, it's the 5 minutes of actually getting in the truck and turning the key and pulling out of your driveway. And then once you're out of your driveway, once you're on the interstate, you're done. I mean, you've done the hard part. The hard part is getting through the commitment of doing something new. And that's really, genuinely, every time in my life, it has been 5 minutes. That's all I had to do was 5 minutes of being courageous or bold. And then after that, it's like, okay, now I'm in. Now I'm in.
Yeah, that initial commitment. And that's the thing that you're like, I just did the hard part. And now I'm doing it. Now I'm committed. And it's almost like that's the moment of courage when you just have to push through any of the doubts that are going on in your mind that might talk yourself out of it. I actually just experienced that like last week. I'm going on a solo trip to Bali in August, and the hardest part, like you said, is like buying the flight, right? I'm like, all I need to do is buy the flight and then the rest will come into play later. So I bought the flight, and then the second I did that, I'm like, I'm gonna go on a rollerblade. I need to like blow off that steam, because it's like a bit nerve-wracking when you just like buy the actual flight. So I'm like, great, flight is booked, I'm going. Absolutely nothing else is planned, but I know I'm going because the flight is done. And that's the hardest part and the biggest commitment, right? Bryce, you bring up this idea that everyone often projects like this perfect plan or this plan that we quote should be following in life, or this path that society projects. And you took a very different path, traveling around the world and having these really awesome experiences and insights along the way that isn't the traditional path a lot of people are taking. How have you found it effective to tune out the noise and tune out that should narrative that society projects and stay strong in your journey that's best served you?
Yeah, 100%. It's been pretty radical. So for one, my oldest sister is an MD, a doctor, and the sister in between me and her is high up in commercial real estate development, so a pretty well done corporate career. And then there's me, which is I didn't go to college. I've worked as a carpenter for the past 4 years and not really steady. Pretty much I've been I don't like to use the term fired, but I've definitely left the vast majority of jobs that I've had in the past 5 years since now working for myself. And so it's a very different path. And that contrast alone in my own family, it's something that's hard to wrestle with. Sometimes I know my sister who works in corporate real estate, she was one time talking to my mom and she's like, oh, I just wish I was like Bryce where I had everything figured out. And I just felt like life was working for me. And my mom was like, you don't really think he feels like that, do you? So even in my own bubble of these three people, I still have that experience. But at large, there has been only one thing that has been able to sustain me through the contrast between my life and going my way versus the world at large. And not to get crazy preachy, but it's like my relationship with God, like my relationship with Jesus, because I don't think there's any other way I could sustain, even in my own family dynamic, my oldest sister being a doctor versus me doing what I do, which is writing about my travels. I don't think there's any way I could sustain that dynamic and the pressure of the world asking me when I'm 17, oh, what are you going to college for? What college are you going to? What do you want to be after you graduate college? Versus what I've done. So in a lot of ways, it's my relationship with God and just the understanding that there is more to this life than what society sells you. And also, so many of the events of my life have forced me out of this standard pathway that we are kind of sold. So I'm very thankful for that, because in a lot of ways, the tragedies I've experienced in my life have actually been the greatest blessings, because they have forced me to divert from the path in so many ways. But ultimately, it comes back to just the understanding of why I'm here. And through spending time in nature and coming to know Jesus, like my identity and my purpose is not as a doctor or as working in forestry, which is what I was going to go to university for, funny enough. But it's in the call that's been placed on my life that I came to understand through spending time in silence and talking with Jesus about it. So these different experiences have been the avenues or the vessels that have been used to give me confidence and clarity in the alternate direction that I'm taking.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think it's really interesting how there's almost like two different dynamics going on there. There's your sister, like you shared, who's like, oh, Bryce has it all figured out. Like, I wish I could just go travel and like live like him. And then there was people who were like, well, what are you going to study in college? Like, don't you want to like stick to the stable path? And it's almost like you can't win, right? It's like there's some people who like think you're on the right path, and then there's some people who think that you should like stick to the stable path. And ultimately, I feel like what we all feel is that people are going to project what they think we should be doing, what they think feels safe and right. But there is no right path. And the right path, like you shared, is really tuning inward and trusting in God and the universe that like this is my path and my journey. And the more that I tune in with myself and stay connected to myself and trust my inner calling, like what I actually feel drawn towards, the more I can tune out that external noise and narrative and stay true to that. And I think it comes back again to this idea of spending time alone. Like that really is the way that we can gain an understanding of what we are drawn to and what we are meant for. But I find, at least personally, and it sounds like you experience it as well, that the more we see what everyone else is doing and the more we like hear everyone else's chatter of their projections and shoulds, it does become difficult to feel confident about our path if it looks different.
Yeah, 100%. A great example of this just happened 3 days ago, where a buddy of mine who's a little bit younger works for an off-road company. That's where a lot of my work is as well. And he's got a 9 to 5 effectively, and his dad loves that for him, as parents do. They want security and safety for their children. And he's like, I don't know, man, I just don't feel like I can do this for the rest of my life. I'm thinking about going, and I'm 24 and he's younger than me, so he's not like, he's got all these obligations. He's like, I think I'm just going to go. I really want to just go work in a ski resort for the winter and then figure out what's going on after that. But it's just the contrast between my dad wants me to do this and I think I want to do this. All I told him was, you already know what you need to do. Most people already know deep down what they need to do. So it's exactly what you said. By spending time in solitude and just going, most of the time, the first thought that if somebody says something like, oh, what do you want to do with your life? Most of the time, you probably already have that first thought that comes to it might be really quiet, it might be really hidden and under some layers of even embarrassment. But you have that first thought that goes, I want to do this. And maybe you don't say it. Maybe you go, oh, my sister's a doctor, my sister works in commercial real estate. I want to go into forestry. But deep down beneath that, it was something else. So yeah, the greatest way that I have found in my own life to access that understanding is spending time alone and listening for that first hint, the first question mark that comes, because that initial, the initial thought that comes to mind when somebody asks you a question like that is normally probably what you're actually thinking before you start to worry about being judged or the financials or anything else.
You're so right. It's always there and it always comes up, but it's so interesting that, like you said, it's so spot on. The second it comes up, that's the second that we start to talk ourselves out of it because of all of the like limiting beliefs and maybe self-doubt and the fears. And it starts to bury that true desire in all of these layers of reasons why we aren't going to go for it. Like your friend in the 9 to 5. I'm really glad you brought that up because it's an example that I hear all the time that I personally experienced in stepping away from a 9 to 5 myself. It's like, I know there's more to this and I know I don't really want to be doing this long term, but so many people are telling me that this is the path and that this makes sense. And, what if I step off of this path and I no longer have that stable income? And what if I step off this path and it's worse than the path I'm on currently? And there's so many different ways we can dive into these like scary narratives, but I think you're spot on in that we do know what we truly want. And again, spending that time in solitude will bring that up, even if it might feel uncomfortable to face that and actually go for it. And then you shared that really great tip earlier. It's like, just take the 5 minutes of courage. Like maybe your friend will just like officially put out the application for the job at the ski resort for winter. And then it's like, all right, I did it. Like I took that first step, and that might be the hardest part to gain momentum to continue to take those steps.
Yeah, 100%. I think it comes down to pretty much the core principles. Most people, I think, already know the action. I know in my own life and in the people I know surrounding me, from 30 and married with 2 kids to, the 22-year-old with a 9 to 5 who wants to be a ski bum. They already know what they're supposed to do, what they're being asked by God, the universe, Jesus to do. It's just a little bit of hesitation that comes on the second. As soon as that pops into their mind, there's the second part of it. And that's where the hesitation comes. And that's where you need just that little bit of courage to just go, not I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to account for it. And I'm going to see if there's anything valid there. Because, if you have like my older buddies who, have a wife and 2 kids, you can't just go quit your job and do whatever you want. But accounting for it, understanding if it's realistic, but coming back to taking the courage to take that first action, sending the job application, quitting the job, booking the flight, leaving home and going on the road trip, whatever it might be.
You share this really cool idea too, that the problem isn't money, it's knowledge and mindset. And I would love to dive into this and hear your insight on this, because I think a big thing that does hold people back from going for it is clinging to that financial stability. So what would be your message for that person?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One would be there's a heavy calling placed on each individual by the Western world to be materialistic, to go, I need the new truck with a $900 a month payment. I need the nicer apartment. I need whatever it might be, the new iPhone even. You have to separate yourself from that. The first time I had the realization, like, oh my gosh, I'm getting too attached to stuff, I went through my closet and I threw out. I worked at a surf shop for a few years, so I had so much like nice clothes, wetsuits, winter gear, like snowboard, skiboard, surf stuff. I got rid of it. I donated it. Some of the clothes I wish I had, it was nice stuff, but just to force myself to break from that materialism. So that was a huge component. It's just forcing the recognition that the tangible materialistic goods that we have are not us. They're a separate thing. And I think there's scripture that goes back to that. For instance, Jesus was talking to some of his disciples, and one of the sayings was, if God provides for the lilies of the fields and the birds in the air, why would he not provide for you, which is you're of so much more value? So just understanding that principle and actually believing it has been huge. The other part of that is practical, which is just like the first time I went to Europe, or the last time I went to Europe, it was when I lost my bags on that flight. That was $4,000 for 2 weeks. I was 18 years old and I worked 60 to 80 hours a week in fast food, making $11.25 an hour. So, I lived at home, I didn't pay rent, but all the money I earned went to that. Was that the if I was being money conscious, was that the wisest way to spend my money? Probably not. There's cheap places to go. You can road trip across America in any car. I'm actually going to do a YouTube video on this soon, because I did 3 weeks through Maine and Eastern Canada, Nova Scotia, in a Honda Civic, which gets 35 miles per gallon. I think my gas from South Carolina there and back was $500, and my food was $200. So there's these cheap ways to do it. For instance, if I'm traveling abroad, I was in New Zealand for 3 months. I did the math. It came out to $32 per day to live in New Zealand for 3 months. Of course, the currencies, they don't have the best currency and everything's cheaper there. But, instead of going, oh, I want to go to Europe, it's so expensive, I can't do it. I just have to stay at work. Maybe it's just like I live in Georgia. Maybe I'll go on a road trip to Maine or to Colorado and just spend 2 weeks doing that. So even that's a big ask. Really breaking it down, the cheapest and best way to have a surreal experience in creation is to just leave on a Friday night after work and go spend a night or two in the woods. Every state in this country has camping, whether it's a state park or a national forest or something. Beaches are free, forests are free. We live in the greatest country for public land access. Like, money is not a valid excuse for 90% of people in this country. There are the 10% who do have it's a legitimate concern, but most of us spend money on clothes and items and cars we don't need, and then go, oh, I can't spend $100 in gas to go drive 30 hours across the country or whatever it might be. There is a way to do these things budget consciously, and that's something I've learned, and I have a guide on that actually on my website, but there's plenty of online resources on how to get flights for free, or cheap, how to get hostels for free, how to find gas for cheap, how to do these things. Or going back to my buddy who's a ski bum, or who wants to be one for the winter, literally getting paid, having food and accommodations provided for, and earning money while going on a rad adventure for the winter. So like seasonal work is a great example for anybody who's, I was going to say under 30, but I was in Death Valley and I met a couple who's 65 and all they do is seasonal work in an RV. In the winter, they're in Death Valley. In the summer, they're in Glacier National Park. So there's so many different ways to go about finding ways to get out there into creation.
I love that quote. Travel is an experience that will always make you richer. And I think about that any single time that I, again, like buy the flight, book the trip or whatever, because there is the half of my mind that's like, is this the wisest way to spend my money, or should I have spent that much money on XYZ? But then there's the other half of me that knows for a fact that that experience and that thing that I really want to do is investing in my happiness and only going to make me happier and wiser and stronger. And so that's one thing that I wanted to highlight that you shared, that if it's something that you really want to do, it will be worth the money. And then there's this other idea that came to mind in what you shared, that maybe it's not like the quote, like wisest, or like maybe you want to cling to that financial stability and that it might not seem like the most practical thing. But part of me is wondering like, okay, maybe we're telling ourselves that sometimes because we're scared to actually adventure into that unknown and uncertainty. Like we were saying before, like if that's the thing you really want to do, why are you talking yourselves out of it? If there are ways to practically go on the trip and to afford it. Like there's plenty of options for you to have these awesome experiences and explorations. But again, it's that mindset. Are you going to cling to the mindset that like, oh, it's too expensive, I can't? Or are you going to find a way to do it because life is short and having these experiences are really important? And you share this other idea that I think would be really great to dive into as we wrap up here. Why figuring out what you don't want in life is actually the true way to discover what you do want.
Yeah, it is really a simple theory that I came up with when I was like 17 or 18 and was working all these jobs I hated, which was it is way easier and way simpler to find out what you don't like. I mean, it's as simple as, what sport do I like? Well, that's a very broad question, but what sport do I not like? Well, I can go play on a club soccer team for a weekend and see if I like it or not. I can go play volleyball on the beach with some Facebook group and see if I like it or not. So even going down to work, like for me, it was really figuring out first what I could do as a high schooler, as somebody who's not going to university. And that was, well, I worked in fast food. I hated that. I painted houses. I hated that. I laid AstroTurf. I hated that. Eventually, after doing about 10 things I didn't like, I stumbled into doing joinery, like building custom furniture. And I was like, okay, it's not the love of my life, but if I have to have a job and I need to make money, I could do that. And so that also applies from jobs to friends and figuring out what kind of people you like to be around, to even churches. Like for somebody who's trying to find a church and, there's so many bad experiences people have with churches. It's like, what kind of church do I want to go to? Well, just go to 10 of them and figure out which ones you don't like and what you don't like about them. And then I want to go to this kind of church. I want to have this kind of job. I want to have this kind of friendship. I want to do this kind of travel, whether that's something bougie, like $4,000 for 2 weeks in Europe, or something super low key, like $30 a day in New Zealand. So everybody always asks you what you want to do. It's way easier to figure out what you don't like. It's quicker, takes less time, and it guides you in the same direction, probably even easier.
I think that's so spot on. I just think it's a really important narrative to follow, because when people do ask us the question, like, what is it that you want to do? It almost makes us feel bad when we don't know exactly what we want to do. But reminding ourselves like, oh, our 20s and 30s, and honestly, life in general, is just about figuring what doesn't work and taking steps away from that to create space for what does feel more aligned. And it's really all about trial and error. And I see it this way too. If we are trying new things and learning what doesn't work, that means that we're constantly learning and growing. And that means that we're constantly learning more about ourselves and what we like and don't like. But we're not going to figure out what we don't like if we don't step into that unknown and outside of our comfort zone. And it goes back to that trip, right? Like, yeah, there's a lot of things that could go wrong on that trip. You might not even like love that place, but you're not going to know until you do it, right? Like your friend might not love being a ski bum for that winter, but how is he going to know unless he takes the risks and figures it out, and he might discover something else in that experience that opens his eyes even more. And I think it's just a really important thing to always come back to, and reminder for us all to remind ourselves that like we're on the right path, even if it feels like all we're doing is figuring out what's not for us, because even if it's behind the scenes currently, it's guiding us towards the things that are meant for us. And I think it also removes that pressure, like we were touching on earlier, to feel like our lives have to be perfectly figured out and look like everyone else's. Because we're also stuck in this trap of doing all the time and always being productive. What is your advice for the person that constantly feels that need to do and be productive and maybe go on that trip and just embrace solitude and not doing anything?
Yeah, great question. It's actually, I'm that person this past month with work and all these different business choices and stuff going on at home. So in that exact space, what I know I need to do is, as uncomfortable as it may be, again, going back to the 5 minutes of courage, I know I need to put a tent and a backpack in my car, and this weekend or this week, I need to go drive into the woods, somewhere it's a little bit cooler than Charleston, South Carolina, and go spend a night or two disconnected from the world. I know for me, again, it's different for different people, but for me, I know I have to disconnect myself from the realities of this world, from the demands and the calls and the desires, the solution is to go sit in solitude and silence in the woods and turn off my phone, or even better, not even have cell signal, not even have the option to use my phone, and just really do a hard disconnect. And that's what so much of my work is about, really. I do not think somebody can emphasize enough the importance of disconnecting from what the world demands of us every day. So again, that's a big thing. Go take 2 nights, but every day doing a little bit of disconnect. So if you're, if you're a Christian, that's reading your Bible or going for a walk or prayer, meditation. A lot of people do. Like for me, little things throughout the day, 15 minutes, morning, night, read my Bible, go for a run. Those are 2 things each day that are going to be the centering blocks to keep me sane. And then as often as I can, when stuff gets really chaotic, when you feel like, oh, I need to take those 15 minutes and I need to maximize my day and get all this stuff done. The busier life gets, the more you need to lean into disconnecting, as ironic as it sounds. Everybody's got a to-do list, and it's only getting longer as we get older and more mature and have more responsibilities. So it's not realistic to try to do more each day. That's going to burn you out.
I think that's spot on, and a reminder that we always need to stick to. And like you said, it is kind of ironic that sometimes the more we cling to doing more on our to-do list, the more pressure we feel to keep doing, and the more it just keeps keeping us trapped in that cycle and heading on that path to burnout. It might not feel like the natural choice, but stepping away and tuning into that slow down and peace, whether that be, again, like 20 or 30 minutes, or whether that be spending 2 nights somewhere, in that small way, we always seem to feel a little bit more relaxed and a little bit less of that pressure and constant need to just continue on the hamster wheel. It's almost like, oh, actually doing isn't the answer. Turns out I am feeling better in this moment, stepping away. And that's the clarity and solitude that I needed. And then I like too that you share that it doesn't have to be like a 2-week trip or a 3-month trip to New Zealand. It can be, again, just something in your day that you do. Or if you need to lean into like an actual travel experience, it can be a night or 2. It doesn't have to be something major. And having that time to really check in with ourselves and that time in solitude to step away from the constant doing and the noise, and again, lean into that discomfort of being on our own, is just such a beautiful and powerful experience. Bryce, you're so awesome, and I've loved this conversation. Where can people find more of your travels and follow along?
Yeah, thank you for having me. BryceCTravels.com, Bryce with a Y, C as in Campbell, which is my last name. That's where all my links are. Everything's there, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And the biggest thing is my email newsletter that I put out. 2 free emails a month, pretty much going through what my travels are teaching me and what I'm learning, and answering people's questions on how to get started or what to do with their life, questions on anything people submit, and I run through them in the emails. So BryceCTravels.com.
If you enjoyed today's episode of Fulfilled, don't forget to press follow or subscribe wherever you are listening. Leave a comment on the show. Let me know your thoughts and leave a rating or review. All of this would mean so much in my efforts to grow the Fulfilled community, and I'll see you all again next week on your journeys to living fully.